Some of the stats are kind of mind blowing. Like people who looked at a picture of their children before making a financial decision made much better decisions than those who didn't and saved twice as much, right? So this is just the simple act of re-grounding yourself in what matters.
I can't wait to introduce you to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the Know Me podcast where the future of financial advice starts with discovery. We're bringing you candid conversations with top industry leaders, innovators, and behavioral finance experts, exploring how wealth managers can deepen client relationships, personalize advice at scale, and drive real business growth. Because clients don't just want financial plans, they want to feel understood. They want to be known. Stay tuned, subscribe, and get ready to transform the way you connect with clients. Know Me, transforming discovery into growth. Hi, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Daniel Crosby, one of the leading voices in behavioral finance and the psychology of money. Daniel is a psychologist, a New York Times bestselling author, a behavioral finance expert whose work sits at the intersection of investing, human behavior, and personal meaning. His books include The Behavioral Investor and The Soul of Wealth, and they've been translated into 17 languages. They've helped advisors and investors around the world better understand the psychological forces that shape financial decisions. In addition to his writing and speaking, Daniel plays a key role in the fintech world as the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion Advisor Solutions, where he helps develop tools and insights that allow financial advisors to better serve clients through the lens of behavioral science. He's also the host of the Standard Deviation podcast, where he explores the psychology of investing, decision-making, and human behavior with some of the brightest minds in finance and beyond. What makes Daniel's work so powerful is his ability to translate complex psychological research into practical insights that help people make better decisions, not just with their portfolios, but with their lives. Today, we're going to explore the psychology behind money decisions, why even smart investors make irrational choices, and what it really means to build wealth that aligns with meaning and purpose. I'm so thrilled to welcome Daniel. And I'm also humbled. I've met so many people that have been inspired by you, that have launched businesses because of you, that have incorporated your input and your research into their work. Thank you for being here on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I make it a point to only appear on podcasts named after ABBA songs. So it's great to be here.
I'm so glad that we could abide. That's so good that we were able to map that to that criteria. One question we ask all of our guests, and I'm super excited about your answer to this, is what excites you about the moment we're in right now with respect to the future of wealth management?
Oh, I think this is the most exciting moment of my entire, whatever it's been, 16, 17 years in the industry, because I think we're just going to be freed up to be more human, and we're going to get tools to be more effectively human. There's a lot of pearl clutching and hand wringing going on right now about, the role of humankind in this brave new world that we're embarking upon. But I think that the things that you and I talk about and the things that you and I try and enable in the advisors that we serve, I think there's never been a better time to be in our industry. And I'm thrilled about that.
Oh, agreed. I think we're in this awakening. We are in the renaissance of human-centered finance. And because of a convergence of so many things where differentiation matters, ability to get deep and have a holistic approach to your clients matters. I love that. So out of curiosity, I don't know that I've heard this story. Why did you get involved in the psychology of money?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we go back far enough, I went to college with an eye to being a financial advisor slash investment manager. My father was and is a financial advisor, and I saw that he had a great life. He had clients who loved him. He did good in the world. He treated his work like a mission, and he was home early every day too for supper, and was very involved in our lives. And so I thought that was great. And so I went to school with an eye to being an advisor. After my first year in school, I actually took a 2-year break from school to go on a mission for my church. So I went to the Philippines and I lived in Manila for 2 years. And, being a kid from Alabama who then learned Filipino, the Filipino language, and spent 2 years in Southeast Asia, I had quite an awakening just about how different people lived and different culture and different cultural values and why people behave the way they did. And so I returned from my time in Asia with a deep desire to just learn more about psychology. And at the same time, someone I was very close to had developed a severe eating disorder. And so when I got back from my mission, she was inpatient, and I was serving as sort of a liaison between her family and the inpatient facility where she was housed out near where I was going to school. So the combination of helping my friend and that mission experience really sort of pointed me towards psychology and clinical psychology in particular. So finished my bachelor's and then my PhD in that. But in the process of getting a PhD, you have to do thousands of hours of clinical work. Some of my work was with prison populations and other folks. And Marla, I just burned up. I mean, I was 23 years old when I started. I was ill-equipped to handle, just the heaviness of that work. And so as I was graduating with my PhD, I had arrived at this point where I knew that I knew two things for sure. I knew that I loved psychology and I loved thinking deeply about why people did the things that they did. And I also knew that I did not want to do it in a clinical context. And so I came to my father and said, look, these are the two truths I know. What would you do with these two things? And he said, I don't know what to tell you, but I do know there's a lot of psychology in my work. So it would be interesting to see if anyone is doing anything with the psychology of money, basically. And so I dug into that. Now, my dad, 18 years ago, did not know the words behavioral economics or behavioral finance, but that kernel of an idea, long story short, put me on a path to exploring this. And the realization I had there that has sort of served as the role I've played in my career since then is that there was great work being done by people much smarter than me, like in the ivory tower, but that work wasn't trickling down to wirehouse financial advisors in North Alabama like my dad. And so I found this niche where I could be a sort of a translator between people with my same academic background and the people actually doing the work. And that's been it's been a great place to live, these many years.
Super interesting. So I've shared here on the podcast. I also share as part of my story. My dad is also a financial advisor. He became a financial advisor at Merrill in 1984. I don't know if is your dad at Merrill as well? You said one of the
Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley. Okay. And so you're from Alabama. I'm from Texas. And from this really interesting background, I've had a similar experience. And I've actually spoken to my dad, and he said, my job has always been very heavily therapy. That is what we do. It is a huge part of the advisory journey. So now we're in this era where there is an awakening. There is a cognizance to Kahneman and all of the different thought leaders that have actually now permeated some of the thinking of the people in this industry, recognizing that behavioral finance matters, number one. What do you think, if you were going to just answer right now, that advisors still, and there may be multiple answers, but what do they still misunderstand that is hurting their business as it relates to how people actually make financial decisions?
Can I have a few? No. Okay. So
yeah, I know there's going to be a lot of them, but if you were just going to stay at a high level, maybe it's just that this component matters way more than you think.
Yeah, I think a few things. One is, first of all, I think in the time that, folks like you and I have been in this business, there's been an absolute explosion of interest in this world of whatever we want to call it, behavioral finance, human-centered finance. And that's wonderful to see. But I think that a lot of times that enthusiasm has focused more on the bias part of the equation to the exclusion of some of the other richness that psychology brings to that conversation. If we look at the trajectory of psychology writ large, right, like psychology as the broader discipline, it started with the study of what makes us broken, right? The study of what makes us anxious and sad and depressed and non-functioning. And only in the mid 90s did we move toward a science of flourishing and a science of happiness and wellness and exceptional performance and what we now call positive psychology. And I think that behavioral finance has largely followed that same trajectory. We started out by needing to make a clean break with traditional econometrics, and the way that we did that is that Thaler and Kahneman and others sort of created longer and longer lists of all the ways that we're screwed up and broken and do dumb things with our money. And look, there's value to be had there. Like we have to keep our clients from stepping on rakes and, tripping over themselves and making poor decisions. But there's also all this research on the positive side of the ledger on how we can live with meaning and intention, and how we can save, spend, and invest to make ourselves happy. And so I think that for a time, behavioral science has been used to sort of hit clients over the head, to show them that they were fallen and broken in all the ways they needed our help, which is true, but maybe not important, or maybe not easy to hear. And so I think we've left like at least half of the richness that behavioral finance has to offer on the table, and I think that's a big shame.
That's so powerful. And you think about like, okay, how do we focused a lot on what is broken, and now we're looking at much deeper questions, becoming, let's call it the opposite side of the spectrum. How are you become the least broken, the most unbroken? How do you actually maximize, really actualize life? If you think of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you're looking at living the best, most fulfilling life, what are some of the, if you were going to just point to some behavioral biases that you see again and again and again? And when you do your talks, I know you talk about a lot of them. You talk about anchoring, and you talk about a lot of different areas of behavioral bias that are front and center for advisors in the way that they are helping people make decisions, get unblocked. What are some of the top ones that you see all the time?
So I actually made a study of this because one, you mentioned some of my books, and one of the books you mentioned was The Behavioral Investor. That was my second solo book. And one of the things that I did in The Behavioral Investor is I took this, you've maybe seen it on LinkedIn or somewhere, this codex of human bias, of cognitive bias, which is, creeping into the 200s now, like 200 different ways that we can make poor decisions with our money.
Those are just like
And
identified, researched biases that have a label.
yes, right. And I mean, a lot of this is just people, candidly, if I may be cynical for a moment, it's like people getting tenure, right? Like coming up with sort of smaller and smaller biases that are cool, but quirky and not perhaps all that influential. So what I did was I sort of ran an analysis to say, what are the big ones, right? Like what are the biases that sit atop all these? What are the meta biases that sit atop all these sort of smaller tendencies? And what I came up with was really four sort of primary meta biases, four primary human tendencies. And they were ego, emotion, attention, and conservatism. So briefly, ego is the various flavors of overconfidence. This would be, we think that we're luckier than average, we think that we're better than average, and we think that we're more prescient about the future than we actually are. And so this constellation of overconfidence can lead to all kinds of bad places. And in fact, it's kind of the granddaddy of them all, because overconfidence is the one that begets all the others, because it's the one that tells us we have nothing to work on. I mean, we had a billionaire investor say yesterday he had no need to be introspective, and no need to think about his own behavior or be introspective. I mean, it's crazy work, right? So the overconfidence is the thing that sort of promulgates all the others. So emotion is the second one. It's probably the most intuitive. It's the various ways in which we let our emotional state, our affective state, our emotional state color our decision making. Conservatism is the third one, which is the tendency we have to be status quo prone, to be risk averse, to confuse the things that we know or are familiar with things that are safe and good. It's just kind of all the various flavors of protectionism and small-mindedness that humans are prone to. And then the last one is attention. And the way that I talk about this one is it's our tendency to confuse things that are loud with things that are likely. So the more easily we can bring something to mind, the more prevalent it seems to us, the more risky it seems to us. But a lot of times the things that loom largest in our minds are kind of extraordinary or rare, but seem bigger than they actually are to us. So those are kind of the big four.
Super, super interesting. And I think everything resonates. I wonder, one of the talks, I'm actually doing a couple of talks in the next couple of weeks for Barron's. And one of the things that I want to highlight for them, and I'm curious for your thoughts on, is not only how this shows up for clients, but how this shows up for the advisors. And how does it actually get permeated through the culture of an advisory firm? So some of these biases may be some of the things that are holding firms back from innovation, that are stopping this transformation from portfolio and asset centricity to client and outcome centricity in the way that clients determine value. So how do you see that, and how do you make sure when you're giving your talks, when you're working with advisory firms, you're kind of also giving them a mirror to say, this is not just your client, this is you.
Yeah, Jason Zweig has that great piece about, we typically use behavioral finance as a window onto other people's behavior, but it's most powerfully applied as a mirror onto our own behavior. And, I think my fear is in writing all these books that people read them and they're looking for sort of gotchas for their spouse or their clients or whoever. And really, this should all begin with us. Something unscientific, but a deeply held belief of mine is that people can tell when you've done the work. People can tell when you've been introspective. People can tell when you've humbled yourself or used that mirror. And I couldn't give you chapter and verse. I couldn't tell you all the stats, but I would tell you that experientially, there's a difference when you're sitting with an advisor who has held that mirror up to herself or not. And so, even in the research too, we know that when it comes to how financial advisors manage their own money, they're prone to all the same mistakes that anyone else makes. Like, they do an excellent job of managing other people's money, but tend to make a lot of the same mistakes with their own money that anyone else does. And you just see this again and again and again, right? I mean, we can give our friends relationship advice that we would be slow to take ourselves. We can see red flags in someone else's relationship that we would be slow to see in our own. There's just something about the human condition where we see others' behavior far more clearly than we see our own. And you've actually seen this in the research where your colleagues are a better predictor and descriptor of your behavior than you are of your own behavior. The people you work with, that you share an office with every day, can give more precise predictions about what you're going to do next than what you can give about yourself. Because when we evaluate our own behavior, we evaluate it through this self-righteous lens of wanting to be, righteous and good and moral and intelligent and all these things. And when other people are looking at the way we move through the world, they have no such filter. They just see us for who we are. So I think it's a great point that we can't drive home enough, that this isn't just for clients.
It's very powerful, everything you're saying. So Dr. Megan Lertz, who works with us at NOMI, and I were talking about this week or last week, and we were talking a lot about emotional salience and emotional salience as a measure to really help understand clients' availability. And Meg looked at me and said, Marla, this is you. Like this, the way we are describing this attribute this particular component of a client is your experience as a client, just with everything she's learned about me and my relationship with wealth and money and my decision making. And it was extremely helpful for me to kind of understand, oh, now I get it. Now I understand so much more about myself.
There's many things to love about Dr. Lertz. One of the things is that she pulls no punches. That's very good. Yeah.
That is true. Coming back to your book, The Soul of Wealth, you get into meaning. I noticed the recent blog that you put out talking about meaning. I thought it was a fantastic piece. I wonder what inspired that shift of the conversation to not just financial success and advisor efficacy, but to meaning and deeper purpose.
So my whole journey has been one where I have gotten incrementally closer to talking about meaning full time. So we're certainly heading that way. And that's long been a desire of mine. Even when I was in grad school, one of the things that you have to do as a PhD student in psychology is land on what they call a theoretical orientation. So basically, what's your map of the world? What's your explanatory map for making sense of human behavior? And the school that I landed in was the existential school of thought. So Soren Kierkegaard, Viktor Frankl, Simone de Beauvoir, other folks like that, who put meaning and purpose at the core of what drives us. And if I can get a little wonky for a minute, Freud, like a Freudian psychologist would say, look, we are determined, we are shaped by the things that have happened to us. Like, you're as good or as bad as the stuff that happened to you in the past, and that's a highly deterministic way of thinking. Kierkegaard and Frankl and the rest would say, look, the past has its place, but you can choose your future, you can choose your meaning, and the things that you're reaching for and the things that you're striving for can shape you even more than the things that have happened to you. And that's sort of what I ascribe to. So I've long wanted to talk about these things. I tiptoed into that with The Soul of Wealth, which was a book about, money and meaning. And I've actually written but not published another book that's all about just meaning. Meaning has nothing to do with money. And that excerpt that I published is from there. But yeah, it's, even if we look at the money side of things, there's a chapter in The Soul of Wealth about this intersection of money and meaning. And some of the stats are kind of mind blowing. Like, people who looked at a picture of their children before making a financial decision made much better decisions than those who didn't, and saved twice as much, right? So this is just the simple act of re-grounding yourself in what matters. People who have named accounts. So, the Marla Retired to Puerto Rico Fund versus the Marla Fund ABC XYZ. It's a very different animal when the market gets choppy and you go, well, you look at that and go, should I go to cash? And you go, well, I still do want to move to Puerto Rico one day, so maybe I'll stick with it. One study found that people were 10 times less likely to go to cash. I talk in the book about emotional salience and the power of visualization and some of the research on how helping our clients visualize their future can lead them to make better decisions and be more behaviorally adherent. So a lot of this conversation around meaning can feel kind of woo-woo, but there's actually a ton of empirical support for the idea that, helping your clients get specific and get visual about what their purpose is can have a host of benefits.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at Nomi.com.
I have a separate question I'd like to ask you, actually, a follow-up on what you're saying. So you started doing work for the church and mission work. And I know that there is a lot of religious content and writings around agency, free will, maybe is the more religious term that they look at. Do you see an overlap there between kind of the religious conversation around you're here and you're here to do good? There is a element of like you have that free will to make the right choice to do something impactful. So do you see some overlap there?
Do I see some overlap between
Like religious discussion and this philosophy of psychology that you are most passionate about, this existential
yeah.
school of thought.
Oh, certainly, certainly. So, the article that you mentioned, in that article, I talk about, from my research into meaning, there's basically three things that I have found that are lead to a life of flourishing. And it's three B's, and I call it believing, belonging, and becoming, right? So the believing piece is very consistently, um, people who have lives that they describe as meaningful have a moral code. And I'm sure you're familiar with Rory Sutherland's work. He's got to be maybe my favorite practicing behavioral thinker around. The man is just hilarious and irreverent and brilliant. And, he writes in his book, Alchemy, he talks about his wife. I forget the denomination, but his wife is a priest or a deacon or has some kind of standing in their church. And he's like, look, I'm a dyed in the wool atheist. I think it's garbage. I think there's nothing to it. But the psychological benefits of belief are undeniable. And he talks about that. He sees that in his wife. And so I'm not here to tell anyone what to think, but believing in something, like having some sort of moral buttressing and having some sort of map for making sense of what's good and what's worth pursuing and what's not pursuing in the world. I don't think it's controversial to say that, you need that. Doesn't have to be religion, but you need some sort of sense of making sense of the world. Belonging is the one that is most predictive, right? This is having a tribe, having people you love, and having people who love you, being part of a group. And then becoming is just having a bright sense of where you could take your life, having goals and dreams and aspirations. And so I think the meaning of life boils down to kind of three things, like having a group of people you love and who love you back, having a quest, like having something you're working toward, and having some rules of the road. And I love that. This is kind of what I love to do, like try and take something huge and amorphous and hard to get your arms around and boil it down to something that a dude from Alabama can understand.
I like that you've created also a lot of different just mechanisms, mnemonics, like
Mhm.
ways to remember the three B's and here's the four,
Mhm.
key biases. So I've also come across this, and I'd like to come back to your billionaire investor. So I've spoken with a couple of family offices where they've said, my clients have private yachts and jets, and they're miserable. So how are you working with the people in our industry to encourage them to think differently about the role money plays toward building a meaningful life and recognizing that it's not the number, it's not the yacht, it's not the jet. There's something deeper, and money has a role to play there.
Yeah. So if, this is why I wrote The Soul of Wealth. This is why I wrote the as yet unpublished meaning book. The stat in particular that catalyzed my writing of The Soul of Wealth. America turns 250 years old this year. 250 years ago, 85% of everyone in the world was living in poverty. So that would be, by today's standards, would be $2 or less per day. So think about that. I mean, 250 years ago in the grand sweep of human history is like 2 days ago, if we condense human history into a year. And it's just, it's just a vanishingly quick time. And in that time, we've gone from 85% of everyone living in poverty to now it's under 9%. We've had an explosion of wealth over the last 200 plus years that is unprecedented in human history. Post World War II, the average size of an American's home has tripled. I mean, we live in a way, even average people, even middle class and lower middle class people live in a way today that would have been extravagant to the kings of not too long ago. And yet we're sadder, we're more disconnected, we're more distant, we're more anxious, we're more stressed. Like, how is it that we haven't done a good job of taking this material wealth that we've created, and we've done a hell of a job of doing that, and how have we not translated that into human flourishing? Well, when you look at, again, Seligman and the positive psychology research, he talks about happiness and sort of the 5 things you need to be happy. There's going to be some overlap with my B's, right? So he talks about positive experiences. This is fun, right? Going to a football game, eating an ice cream cone, walking on the beach, whatever. Money is absolutely fantastic at helping us have fun, right? I mean, if you want to do any of the things that I just talked about, money will help you drive a fast car, go to a beautiful place, whatever. That's fun. Money does a great job. The other things, though, that he talks about leading to happiness: deep work, deep relationships, a sense of meaning that's larger than yourself, and self-improvement. That's kind of his formula for happiness. Money can facilitate those things, right? I mean, money can facilitate self-improvement. Like, it can buy you a personal trainer, but it can't get your butt to the gym, right? Like, it can buy you the money to ask a pretty girl out on a date, but it can't make her love you. So in so many of the ways that matter, we're not spending money right, and we're over-indexed on fun. We're over-indexed. If there's 5 pillars of happiness, we're way over-indexed on the one that money can directly facilitate and way under-indexed on the others. You even look at recent retirees, men in particular, they're quite sad on average. And you look at those 5 things that Seligman talks about. We spend all this time trying to achieve financial independence, but don't prepare for the fact that we get a lot of relational mileage out of being at work. We get a lot of purpose out of being at work. We get a lot of self-improvement out of being at work. So we've planned for one dimension of happiness and let 4 kind of fall by the wayside. And it's a recipe for disconnection and sadness.
We're coming up on time, but I want to ask you 2 other questions. One is, when in your work, you look at the intersection of behavioral science and fintech and technology. How do you see technology helping advisors better understand and guide client behavior, rooted in all of the research that you've kind of built your career around?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I think one is it can be a fast track to human connection. One of the things that I know we're both working on is just helping understand clients better, right? I think technology can do that. It can give you insights into their preferences, their values, their behaviors, and then you've got to do the boots on the ground, very human, very messy, exploratory part of sort of having that out and discussing it. But technology can shortcut and prompt and guide that conversation. So I'm super bullish on technology as a catalyst for deep human connection and sort of shortening the time it takes to get to know someone and really connect with that person. I'm also super bullish on technology's ability to provide just-in-time advice. One thing that we know is that education is a weak predictor of behavior because oftentimes the education is so divorced from the application. And Ebbinghaus and others have done research that shows that if you don't utilize and apply something within, 3 days of learning it, it's gone. And so a couple years ago, when my kids turned 10, I have a deal with them that they can choose anywhere in the world and I'll take them there. So we couple, well, it's like 6 or 7 years ago now. It seems like yesterday. My daughter turned 10 and she said, I want to go to Paris. I was like, great, let's go. So she turns 10, I take her to Paris. Now, I took 5 years of French, right, in middle school and high school. But that's been a minute. And so I get to Paris and I'm useless. Like, I mean, I can't ask for water. I can't order bread. I can't order bread. 5 years of 5 day a week instruction and I'm completely useless. The same thing is true of most people's financial lives. They take some literacy course in high school or something where they learn about what an interest rate is. But then 20 years later, they're sitting down in some banker's office signing their life away on a mortgage, and they're as useless as me in a cafe in Paris. And so what I think we can do with technology is provide real-time, just-in-time education at the point of that emotional decision that I think is going to help people a ton. We can pinpoint when people are in crisis, when they may need that nudge, and we can educate them in the moment of need.
A lot of what you're saying is very much the heart and the core of why did I launch a startup? And it was seeing this big gap and recognizing that connection. And you said like a fast track to human connection. Well, how do you make sure you're making the right connection and you're using the right words that drive the connection? And recognizing that a lot of the way we do it today is static. And when it's static, you've lost the connection. If you haven't gotten the fresh information since 2 years ago, then you're going to be wasting a lot of time just figuring out what is it that is critical, that's changed in your life. I'm curious about the answer to our last question we always ask on the podcast, and that is, what is an instance in your life or a conversation that you've had that for you has totally changed your personal relationship with money?
So I will go back, one of the favorite questions folks love to ask their clients, I think, is what is your first memory of money? And when I think about my first memory of money, it was when I brought home the free lunch form from school and gave it to my parents with, whatever. And I remember sitting in our living room in our, lovely suburban home where I grew up, and my parents, who were quite young when they had me, sitting there and going, wow, like we qualify for free lunch. You qualify for free lunch, Daniel, when I was in kindergarten or first grade or whenever it would have been. And I remember thinking, like, are we poor? And it had never occurred to me. Like, I mean, one of the things that we know about money is that a fish doesn't know that it's wet. Like, however you grow up is just sort of your normal. So I had never thought that we had never wanted for anything. I never felt like we were poor. But this was sort of this interesting moment where it's like, some external source was saying, like, you need help. And, I never got free lunch. I never took advantage of that. But it was an interesting moment to me that was just kind of frozen in amber. And I feel like drives me to this day and drives my outlook. And I have a brother who is 12 years younger than me, who grew up in a materially different home than I did, even though it was the same home and the same parents, because my dad's career was off to the races at that point. When I was coming along, my dad's still cold calling and, we're very much in the early stages of his career. And so it's one of those fascinating instances to me where something And to this day, my brother and I have very different outlooks on money and security and the value of material wealth and things like that, that I think were largely formed at a young age. And so that's one of those moments to me where I've always felt like a little bit like I was playing catch up because of those early experiences and going, oh, money's tight, and I need to make sure that we're okay. And I think that lives with me until this day.
It was a very powerful story, and thank you
Mm.
for sharing it. I'm so grateful that you joined us. It's been wonderful to have you on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. Your insights on psychology of money, the way that you help advisors easily understand, the way you simplify reams and reams of research and create accessibility to the people who need it most. Because what they want, what most advisors I think want, is to change their clients' lives for the better. And I think you tap to the heart of that. You help them really assess this is what your client is really looking for. There's this desire, a need for meaning. And the linkage between meaning and fulfillment is something that is not only something nice to hear and we like to hear it, it's proven. There's tons of research behind why that is critical. So your work reminds us of that all the time, that financial success isn't just about the math, which is what we over optimize for. There's a million different tools available out there to optimize portfolios, to optimize for tax, for allocations in whatever way, for performance measurements. But there's very, very few tools for this. There's very few tools that get into helping with behavior, mindset, psychology, the why behind the financial decisions, the motivators for those financial decisions. Where can our listeners learn more about you? I don't know if any of our listeners have not heard of you. I would imagine they all know who you are, but where can they find more if they would like to?
Yeah, two best places. Go read one of my books, maybe start with The Soul of Wealth, which is my most recent thinking, and then my podcast. The name of my podcast is Standard Deviations, and we'll be having Marla on very soon.
Amazing. And our listeners, money decisions are very rarely purely rational. What is a behavioral habit that's helped you make a better financial decision? How are you looking at behavioral finance and the lessons of psychology as not a window, but a mirror? I think that was a great takeaway from today's call. Let us know in the comments if this was a helpful conversation. Please like it, share it, rate it on your favorite application so others can hear the incredible wisdom that we got today from Dr. Daniel Crosby. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.